Welcome to Who Came Up With That, the podcast where we dig deep into the everyday inventions that shaped our lives in ways we never even seen coming. Today we're talking about the full, flickering, culture-shaking history of television, from pre-electric dreams to modern-day binge machines. But before TV had channels, sitcoms, streaming, or screens, it was just an idea, a vision, if you will, a dream of seeing something happen far away, in real time, with your own eyes. The television. Who came up with that? That's the early 1800s. No phones, no film, no electricity in your house, just candles and gas lights. If you want entertainment, it's music halls, theater, or maybe a shadow puppet show. But there's a growing fascination with illusion. Scientists and showmen alike are trying to answer a strange, almost magical question. How can you make something still appear to move? Well, that's where the zoetrope comes in. Invented in the 1830s, zoetrope, it was a spinning cylinder with little slits on the sides. Inside were drawings of sequential images, a horse galloping, a man walking. Spin it, peek through the slits, and images blur into motion. It's crude, but it's hypnotic. Well, then came the phenakistoscope, the praxinoscope, and finally the magic lantern. Now, the magic lantern was Victorian cinema. Images painted on glass slides, lit by candlelight, and projected onto walls. For kids and adults alike, it was the next best thing to movies. Before movies existed, of course. Some lantern shows had soundtracks, narrators, even spooky special effects. One popular slide was a skeleton that slowly came to life, rising out of its grave to the sound of live pipe organs. These weren't just toys. They were proof that people wanted to see stories, not just hear them. The hunger for moving pictures had begun. As the 19th century ticked along, a new question emerged. What if we could transmit these moving images live across vast distances? This wasn't just fantasy. By the 1870s, the telephone had arrived. You could send your voice across town. Why not your eyes? Enter Paul Nipkow, a 23-year-old German student. In 1884, he patented something truly odd, a rotating metal disc with holes arranged in a spiral. As it spun in front of a lit image, each hole scanned a line of the image, converted it into electrical impulses. He called this the electricious telescope, or the electric telescope. Today, we call it the Nipkow disc. It was brilliant, but ahead of its time. Nipkow didn't have a way to convert those signals back into pictures. No screen, no receiver, but the core idea, which was scanning an image line by line, it would become the foundation of modern television. Nipkow never built a working prototype. In fact, no one did. At least not for another 40 years. But his disc had set the stage. It was the first real blueprint for turning light into electricity and then back again. Throughout the late 1800s, the idea of television, or something like it, had started appearing in fiction, not just in science journals, but in novels, plays, cartoons, even speculative tech expos. French writer Albert Robida, he imagined a device called the telephonoscope, which was a screen that let you watch concerts, news, even your relatives from far away. His illustrations, drawn in the 1880s, look eerily like modern flat screens. Other writers envisioned televised courtrooms, live war reports, long-distance dating, all in an era when cars still needed to be cranked by hand. In 1879, the New York Sun published a hoax article about Thomas Edison inventing a telephonoscope, and many people believed it. That's how primed the public was for a machine that could send pictures through the air. Meanwhile, inventors tinkered in labs. You had Shelford Bidwell, he demonstrated a photoelectric scanning. Then you had Jan Szczepaniak, who was a Polish inventor. He proposed a television system, quote-unquote, in 1897 that used selenium cells. But the parts didn't fit together. Not yet. As the 20th century dawned, moving pictures finally became reality. Not in homes, but in theaters. The Lumiere brothers in France, they projected short films into paying audiences in 1895. Thomas Edison's kinetoscope that offered a one-person peephole to view moving images. Film was born. But television still out of reach. The main problem was scanning speed. The mechanical systems like Nipkows couldn't handle full motion video at high resolution, and light-sensitive materials like selenium were too slow. Still, researchers, they kept pushing. As radio emerged in the 1910s and 20s, the idea of wireless picture transmission came back into fashion. The question wasn't if anymore, it was how, and who would get there first. Well, two inventors, both obsessed, both brilliant, on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean, they each believed they'd solved the puzzle of television. And that brings us to the story of John Logie Baird, Philo Farnsworth, and the corporate juggernaut that tried to control the screen. We'll start with John Logie Baird, a frail Scottish engineer with poor eyesight, bad health, and a mind that never stopped sparking. In the early 1920s, he was living in a boarding house in Hastings, sickly, broke, and working with spare parts he scavenged from junk shops. Baird was chasing the idea of a mechanical television using the Nipkow disc from decades earlier. His first camera lens, a tea chest with a cutout. His backlight, a collection of bicycle lamps. And somehow it worked. In 1925, Baird transmitted a flickering image of a ventriloquist dummy named Stooky Bill across the room. The next year, he demonstrated the image of a human face in motion. And by 1928, he was broadcasting moving images over the radio waves to a receiving set several miles away. He called it the televisor. Baird wasn't just about motion. He also demonstrated color television, 3D, and even proposed a system for long-distance video transmission using phonograph records to store video frames. But Baird's system was mechanical. It relied on spinning parts, fragile, limited, and not scalable. The future needed something faster, something electronic. And that takes us across the ocean in a remote log cabin in Idaho. There's a little boy named Philo Taylor Farnsworth. He was plowing a potato field when he imagined how television could work. He's just 14 years old. He'd read about electricity and optics in old science magazines. Looking at the furrows in the soil, he saw how an image could be broken into lines, scanned line by line, and transmitted electronically. Not mechanically, electronically. By the time he was 21, Farnsworth had built a fully functioning electronic television system in a San Francisco lab. In 1927, he transmitted a single white line to a receiver in the next room. His camera tube, which called the image dissector, was the first true all-electronic camera. No spinning discs, no moving lenses, just electrons, vacuum tubes, and brilliance. And unlike Baird's invention, Farnsworth's motto had the speed and clarity to scale. But Farnsworth's breakthrough had a looming shadow. Enter David Sarnoff and RCA, the Radio Corporation of America. Sarnoff was a titan. He turned radio from a curiosity into a national pastime. Now he wanted television. And he wanted control. His lead scientist, Vladimir Zarikin, had also been working on an electronic television system. But his early work, it was clunky, and RCA had no working product. So they did what every big company does, and they made Farnsworth an offer. Sell your patents. Name your price. Farnsworth said no. So they came after him. What followed was a bitter legal battle. RCA used its money, lawyers, and media presence to paint Farnsworth as a nobody. But in court, Farnsworth, he stunned everyone by pulling out a blackboard drawing he made at the age of 14, a diagram of his TV concept. It matched his patent perfectly. The judge, they ruled in Farnsworth's favor. RCA was forced to license his technology. But even with this victory, Farnsworth's journey turned tragic. While RCA steamrolled ahead with broadcast technology, Farnsworth struggled. He spent years trying to perfect TV, then shifted to fusion research, believing he could solve the world's energy crisis. By the 1950s, RCA, not Farnsworth, they were credited with inventing television. His name was barely mentioned in textbooks. He died in 1971, depressed and largely forgotten. His widow Elma would later say, "There are times when I wonder if it was worth it." Well, by the late 1930s, both mechanical and electronic TVs were hitting the market. Mostly experimental, expensive, and sold to enthusiasts. In 1939, RCA unveiled its TV system at the New York World's Fair, broadcasting the first televised presidential speech by Franklin D. Roosevelt. A new era had begun. Television was no longer a dream, it was a product, and war was about to decide who got to keep building it. TV broadcasting had just begun to blossom, but then came World War II. For a time, TV's progress was paused, but its technology found new life in the theater of war. Let's go back to that FDR broadcast. It was April 30th, 1939 at the New York's World Fair. A crowd gathered, eyes fixed on a tiny screen. President Roosevelt delivered the first ever televised presidential address, broadcasting the fair's opening. Across the Atlantic, the BBC, they had already been transmitting regularly since 1936. Television was moving from experiment to everyday fixture, but only for a privileged few. Sets were expensive, broadcasts limited, and then the world changed. As World War II escalated, manufacturing shifted to war production. TV factories turned into tank and airplane plants. Broadcasts halted. The BBC, they suspended its television service in 1939, and they didn't resume until 1946. But the technology didn't go dormant. Engineers adapted TV tech for radar, a critical wartime innovation that used radio waves to detect enemy planes and ships. Early radar systems borrowed heavily from cathode ray tube technology, the very heart of television screens. And television cameras were repurposed for surveillance, missile tracking, and training simulators. One of the lesser-known stories is about a BBC technician named George Owen. He had been working on improving broadcast cameras when war broke out. Instead of pictures of shows or plays, his equipment began capturing real-time data from radar screens. This blending of TV and military tech accelerated innovation at a breathtaking pace. Meanwhile, across the pond, American engineers were working furiously to miniaturize electronics for battlefield use. This war-driven tech leap would set the stage for TV's post-war boom. And meanwhile, at home, people still turned to radio, newspapers, and newsreels for information and entertainment. Radio dramas kept spirits high, and cinema was a major morale booster. But television was the promise of a new era, an era delayed but not denied. With the war's end, the race to reclaim and expand television broadcasting would explode. And in 1946, when the BBC resumed television broadcasts, it had the same programs as before the war, but with a new vigor. In the United States, RCA, Dumont, and other manufacturers unveiled sets at low prices, putting television in living rooms all across America. Sports, news, comedy, it all began the rapid journey to becoming staples of daily life. And none of it would have been possible without the wartime advances in technology and electronics. Now, in 1946, there were fewer than 7,000 TVs in American homes. By 1951, over 12 million. TV had gone from novelty to necessity in just 5 short years, thanks to pent-up post-war consumer demand and a booming economy. For manufacturers like RCA, Philco, and Zenith, wartime innovation meant they could finally mass-produce affordable sets. TV became the hearth. Families gathered in front of their black and white sets every evening, watching variety shows, comedies, and news. It was less a piece of furniture and more a portal to the outside world, and a mirror of it too. The most iconic genre of the early television era, you ask? The situation comedy, or the sitcom. In 1951, a former B-movie actress named Lucille Ball, she launched I Love Lucy with her real-life husband, Desi Arnaz. But it wasn't just funny. It revolutionized how TV was made. They filmed it in front of a live studio audience with multiple cameras, creating the format still used today. And because Desi and Lucy insisted on filming in Hollywood and not New York, they recorded their episodes on film, which allowed for reruns. That's right, I Love Lucy helped invent syndication. Also, it was the first time most Americans saw an interracial marriage on TV. Even if the show didn't say the word Cuban out loud very often, everybody knew. That brings us to TV news. That was born from the style of radio and the authority of newspapers. At the center of it all stood Edward Murrow, war correspondent turned television trailblazer. Murrow's See It Now was the first major television news magazine. In 1954, he delivered a now famous on-air takedown of Senator Joseph McCarthy, helping turn public opinion against the Red Scare. With him were legends in the making: Walter Cronkite, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, Men whose calm tones and square jaws defined what truth sounded like for a generation. The TV news anchor became a new kind of national priest, reading the headlines like gospel every night at 6 and 11. Well, back then, TV wasn't just brought to you by advertisers. It was practically created for them. Early shows were often named after their sponsors. The Texaco Star Theater, the Colgate Comedy Hour, Kraft Television Theater, to name a few. Actors pitched toothpaste in character. Game show prizes were product placements. Kids grew up in cereal mascots, candy ads, and jingles so catchy they're still stuck in your grandparents' heads. TV didn't just reflect American consumerism, it taught it. And with the invention of the TV dinner, even mealtime adjusted to make room for the 8 o'clock show. Television in the 50s created an image of America that many historians now call a fantasy. Clean-cut families, obedient children, friendly neighborhoods. Shows like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, and The Donna Reed Show didn't just entertain, they modeled a very specific version of American life. Suburban, nuclear, middle class, heterosexual, and quiet. But just outside that picture-perfect frame, the civil rights movement was rising, Cold War tensions loomed, women were working, and then being told to go home. Television's golden glow cast long shadows. In the late 50s, Americans were glued to game shows like 21 and the $64,000 Question. Smart people won big prizes, or so we thought. In 1959, it was revealed that these shows were rigged. Contestants were given answers. The drama was staged. The whole thing was a performance, just like scripted TV. Congress held hearings, networks panicked, sponsors pulled out. The scandal shook public trust, and it marked a turning point. The networks began to take full control over programming, rather than letting advertisers run the show. Television had grown up a little, and gotten just a bit more cynical. Well, now the golden age of television is over. The family sitcoms and corporate jingles have settled into routine. But the world around television is erupting with color, conflict, and change. From civil rights marches to the moon landing, from Vietnam to Watergate. This is the era when television sets became the most powerful political, cultural, and emotional device in the home. Color TV, meanwhile, had been technically possible since the late 1940s. CBS even launched a mechanical color system in 1951, but it wasn't compatible with black and white TVs. The real breakthrough came in 1954 when RCA's NTSC system, it allowed for color broadcasts that still worked on black and white sets. But color was expensive. TVs cost hundreds of dollars. Few people could afford them or saw much to watch. It wasn't until the mid-60s that color finally took over. In 1965, NBC declared that over half of its primetime programming would be in color. And by 1972, color sets outnumbered black and white ones in American homes. Television wasn't just in every living room, it was bursting with life, too. Television didn't cause the civil rights movement, but it did give it an unprecedented visibility. The world watched as protesters were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as dogs and fire hoses were turned on teenagers, and as Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his dream live from Washington. And that brings us to the Vietnam War. This was the first war Americans watched as it happened. Footage from the front lines played during dinner. Body counts were broadcast alongside baseball scores. Every night, anchormen like Walter Cronkite, they narrated the war into millions of homes. And public opinion shifted. After the 1968 Tet Offensive, Cronkite famously told his viewers that the war could no longer be won. President Johnson reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the middle of America." Television didn't end the war, but it changed how wars would be covered, perceived, and protested forever. Speaking of changes, July 20th, 1969, an estimated 600 million people watched the Apollo 11 moon landing live on television. Black and white cameras on the lunar module beamed images back to Earth. For the first time in history, humans, they saw another world in real time. It was a moment of unity, not just for Americans, but globally. Television didn't just show history, it became history. And it proved, once and for all, that TV could do more than entertain. It could inspire. As the 70s arrived, television began confronting deeper topics. Shows like All in the Family tackled racism, sexism, and political division head-on, through humor. Meanwhile, investigative journalism blossomed with programs like 60 Minutes, that debuted in 1968, and it quickly became one of the most trusted and feared shows on TV. By the time the Watergate hearings were televised in 1973, Americans were tuning in to watch democracy investigate itself. This wasn't just a mirror now, it was a microscope. In the 70s, changing the channel meant getting off the couch as well. But in the 80s, the remote control was king. First introduced in the 50s as the lazy bones, remotes became widespread thanks to infrared technology and, frankly, the rise of couch culture. Viewers could now zap between channels at will. This shift changed how shows were made. Programs had to grab attention instantly or risk getting clicked away. Cue the rise of faster cuts, splashy openings, and teasers before credits. The biggest change? Cable television. Now, before cable, most Americans got 3 or 4 channels. But now, coaxial wires brought a flood of options. HBO, CNN, Nickelodeon, ESPN, MTV. Launched in 1972, HBO promised uncut movies, boxing, and edgy content, all without commercials. It was TV, but different, grittier, riskier. In 1980, CNN became the world's first 24-hour news channel. For the first time, news didn't wait for 6 or 11. It happened around the clock all day long. Also that same year, Nickelodeon debuted, which is a channel just for kids. And then in 1981 came the cultural meteorite. MTV launched at 12:01 a.m. August 1st, 1981. Its first video killed the radio star. A prophecy in hindsight. Suddenly, music wasn't just sound, it was image, fashion, attitude. Artists like Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson, and Duran Duran didn't just top the charts. They defined the visual language of a generation. They had become a cultural DJ, remixing youth identity. And it wasn't just music. MTV spawned animated shows, game shows, reality programs. It knew its audience, young, restless, and remote in hand. Well, meanwhile, CNN's around-the-clock format reshaped how news was consumed. When the Challenger shuttle exploded in 1986, CNN was live. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was CNN who carried it across the globe in real time. When Desert Storm began in 1991, CNN's live footage from Baghdad was broadcast as bombs fell. News became spectacle, urgent, relentless. And with that came a shift toward panel debates, dramatic language, and emotional hooks. The goal wasn't just to inform anymore. It was to retain and entertain. As the 90s approached, cable TV was a vast buffet of niches. Food Network for chefs, History Channel for documentary lovers, Comedy Central for laughs, Discovery Channel for science buffs. Suddenly, families weren't all watching the same show anymore. Dad was watching the Weather Channel. Mom was watching Lifetime. The kids were split between Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. TV was no longer a shared campfire. It was personalized wallpaper. That fracturing would only intensify as the internet arrived. And that unpacks the streaming revolution, a transformation so complete it didn't just change how we watch, it changed what television even means. Streaming wasn't born in the 2000s, not exactly. It was predicted. As early as the 90s, thinkers imagined an information superhighway that would someday let you choose any movie, anytime, right from your couch. The tech just wasn't ready. But by the early 2000s, broadband internet made video on demand possible, and Netflix, originally a DVD rental company, it was the one to pounce. In 2007, they launched their streaming platform. It started with old sitcoms and B-movies, but it felt like magic. You didn't wait, you didn't rewind, you didn't schedule. The show began when you said so. By the early 2010s, a new term had entered the culture: cord cutter. Millions began canceling cable subscriptions, choosing streaming services instead. Hulu, Amazon Prime, YouTube, Netflix. TV used to be linear, a schedule of shows and fixed time slots. But now, it's a library. You binge, you pause, you skip intros, you watch entire seasons in a weekend. Time in the traditional TV sense became irrelevant. So did the channel. Netflix's true turning point came in 2013 with the House of Cards. Well, behind the binge, you got algorithms. Streaming services track what you watch, when, for how long, on what device, and they serve you shows accordingly. This changed storytelling. Creators begin writing with algorithms in mind. Strong hooks in the first 5 minutes, cliffhangers every episode, themes that trend. And with so many choices, audience begin clustering again, but this time by genre, style, even vibe. Prestige drama here, cozy bacon shows there, DIY home reno, true crime, K-dramas. The channel was gone, replaced by you. But freedom had a cost. Streaming was supposed to be simple. One bill, no commercials, no clutter. But by the 2020s, subscriptions multiplied. You got Netflix, you got Hulu, you got Max, you got Disney Plus, you got Peacock, you got Paramount Plus, you got Apple TV, and more and more and more and more. It started to feel like cable again, just decentralized. Plus, you got data collection, password sharing crackdowns, ad-supported tiers as well. The utopia began to feel complicated. And then came the strikes. Writers and actors pushing back against algorithm-driven pay structures and vanishing residuals. Streaming changed the model, but the industry's growing pains were far from over. Well, from 3 channels to infinite libraries, television has evolved faster in the last 20 years than in the previous 80. It's portable, it's personal, it's programmable. But what happens next? We're going beyond the binge, past the stream, into a future where the screen isn't just a window. It's a mirror, a portal, maybe even a collaborator. Remember when TV just talked at you? Well, now it asks you questions. Interactive storytelling like Netflix's Bandersnatch or Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt lets viewers make choices that affect the narrative. It's part video game, part movie. A new kind of medium. Other platforms like Twitch or YouTube Live, they turn audiences into participants. Viewers vote, suggest plot twists, even control characters. This blurring of lines points to a future where television isn't just watched, it's played. And that leads us to the dreaded AI. AI is already writing scripts, editing trailers, recommending what you watch next. But what if AI could make a show just for you? Imagine a sitcom where the characters look like your friends, a mystery where your city is the setting, a rom-com where the lead actor shares your birthday, favorite song, and sense of humor. Companies are experimenting with generative media, where plot, visuals, and pacing adapt to your preferences. It's personalized storytelling, and it's both exhilarating and unnerving. Sadly, TV is leaving the TV. With devices like the Apple Vision Pro, Meta Quest, or AR glasses, screens float in your space. You can binge watch on a virtual 100-inch screen from your couch, or a tent, or a subway. Augmented reality will take it further. Characters might walk through your room, commercials pop up on a real-world building, game shows unfold on your kitchen table. The line between on-screen and in-person, it's disappearing. Ironically, in the most fractured era of TV, we're seeing a hunger for shared experience again. Live watch parties, group chats synced to premieres, millions tuning in at the same moment to shows like Game of Thrones, Succession, or global K-dramas. Streaming platforms are starting to bring back live modes, where release times are coordinated, spoilers are feared, and the event is reborn. The communal fire is relit. And as always, with great power comes great distraction. Television, or its modern incarnation, it's now all-day companion. In your pocket, in your car, on your fridge. And that raises questions. Who decides what we see? What happens to the creators? Can too much choice be too much? Media literacy, creative transparency, and mental wellness will shape how we engage with tomorrow's TV and how it engages with us. From grainy lab experiments to high-def interactive universes, the story of television is far from over. In fact, the screen has never been more alive. Television isn't just something we watch, it's something we live with. I'm Bang Biscuit, and this is Who Came Up With That, where where the past, present, and future always have one thing in common. They're just one frame away.